Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our reading through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 305, The Difference Between Despair. Now, this is another definition poem, that is to say, Emily's struggle to gain some perspective. You know, you could make the argument, and we certainly, I think, have done this a few times in 303, that there are a few poets who love to play around with this distinction game as much as Emily does. And some will see this as philosophic. Certainly that whole notion of perspicacity that we learned when we did our study of Plato's Republic. You'll remember coming out of the darkness of the cave into the light of the sun and what it is that you see and understand. All of that will factor, I think, into this conversation. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you worked through our preceding 304 earlier poems. We just finished with 304, The Day Came Slow. Now, in some ways, we're back with Emily, trying to understand fundamental mental projects. Yes? In other words, what it is that happens in the mind when certain kind of phenomena occur. Now, she'll make a distinction between fear and despair, which, of course, some will say, well, it's kind of the same thing, you know, maybe it's just different kind of slants on it. She'll make the argument that fear is what happens in a particular moment, but that despair is the residual. It's as if despair is somehow more profound than simply fear. While I read this poem, too, also, hear all of the sounds. This is a fun poem to read out loud. The difference between despair and fear is like the one between the instant of a wreck and when the wreck has been. The mind is smooth, no motion, contented as the eye upon the forehead of a bust that knows it cannot see. Now, the balance of this poem is, I think, quite remarkable. Let's begin with this notion of the difference. We will see it again, that phrase in 454. When we get to poem 1101, she's going to play it this way. Between the form of life and life, the difference is as big as liquor at the lip between the liquor in the jug. The latter excellent to keep, but for aesthetic need. The corkless is superior, I know, for I have tried. We'll enjoy when we come back to this poem at 1101. And then a few poems later at 1125, she'll say it this way. O sumptuous moment, slower go, that I may gloat on thee. 'Twill never be the same to starve, now I abundance see. Which was to famish then or now, the difference of a day, ask him unto the gallows led, with morning in the sky. Again, her challenge is to draw distinctions. What is the difference between despair and fear? Now, despair ends up in 31 of Emily's poems. You'll remember from 258, 'Tis the Seal Despair. This idea that despair is somehow qualitatively a little bit different from just simply fear. And what is that? Well, she says it's like, notice there's similes here, the difference between the instant of a wreck, and many have seen this as a shipwreck, and when the wreck has been. In other words, we go through fear, pain, suffering in the moment. Let's qualify that as fear. But then there's the thing that happens afterwards, when we begin to reflect and we start to think about it. And of course, that thinking leads to all kinds of other kind of mental phenomena that is somehow disrupted. Now, it isn't clear in the second part of this poem if she's talking about the mind being smooth. Notice it's not the soul here, it is the mind. It isn't clear whether she's talking about the mind after or before the wreck, right? It isn't totally clear. The mind, she'll say, is smooth, no motion, contented as the eye, and then we're going to finish obviously with sight, contented as the eye upon the forehead of a bust that knows it cannot see. Now, what exactly is it that she's saying here at the end of this poem? Well, I think her argument is that you cannot truly appreciate what kinds of wrecks What kinds of fear? What kinds of despair? Until it has happened. And once it's happened, well, then you're obviously stuck with it. There is no undoing it. And in that regards, I think that 2a, she is making the argument that fear is at the moment of impact, but that despair is the memory of that impact. And that is what makes it so much more harmful. At 2b, notice the rhymes in this poem and how dissonant they are. One, ben, I, see. It's one more game that shall play. What can we relate this type of poem to? I think the one that comes to mind is Burns's To a Mouse. You'll remember, and we've given a full explication of that poem at learnstrong.net, but you'll remember that that whole argument is, mouse, you and I are a whole lot alike, the best laid plans of mice and men, soon off to gang awry. But there's a moment at the end of the poem when he says to the mouse, I wish that I could be more like you. Why? Because the mouse lives only in the present, and as he says at the end of that poem, though I cannot see, I guess and fear, this is the nature of the human condition. Once the plow, and back now to Burns's mouse, once the plow jacks our little house, our plans are all messed up, we have a hard time forgetting that, and then that's the element of despair that comes in. What is the point moment? Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, which for you is worse? Is it the moment of pain and suffering, or is it the memory of that moment of pain and suffering? I hope that Emily is challenging you. Thank you.